Good evening, everyone, and welcome to The Shift. It is May 13th, a beautiful Monday here in Canada, and I'm here with my co-host, Linda Lehman. My name is Mark Jeffrey. We want to welcome you to another episode of The Shift. This is where you get the opportunity to shift from where you don't want to be and shift into where you do want to be. And tonight we're talking about responsibility. That's a big one on everybody's plate. Yep, it is. It's your ability to respond, and that can be positive or maybe not so much. And usually we get ourselves into huge problems when it's the not so much side, when we don't have the ability to respond in the way that we want to, the way that we need to. See, there's something that comes into play here too, because we have this little mechanism in our minds, and I'm not even sure where it ever came from, probably when we were little kids again, and we got in trouble. That person that is always, I don't know who did it, that guy, poor little who, got blamed for everything I know in our household, and I'm sure he didn't do anything. But it's something we don't want to be punished, so we make up excuses why we didn't do something the way we should have done it, rather than just simply apologizing, saying, I'm sorry, I'll do better next time, or I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm just sorry. There's just no, I was late because, or I'm sorry I didn't do it because. It's just simply, I'm sorry I didn't do what I committed to do, and I'm sorry, period, end of story. But you see, we just can't stop there, can we? We just have to rattle on, and we have to come up with excuses, because our ability to respond always wants to keep us in favor. And by that I mean we want to stay on the right side of the tracks. We want everybody to like us. We want people to understand us. And so oftentimes, rather than take responsibility straight up, we dance around it a lot. But the reality of that is that people know. I mean, people know. And it's in everything that you do. And especially if people know you well, they'll know exactly the moment that you start dancing around something, because they know in any other situation you respond in a certain way. And then when you get into the deep weeds, you respond in a different way. So it's going to be very evident. It'll be evident to yourself. You'll start stuttering. Your thought processes won't link together properly, so you can't come out with a proper sentence. And because you're thinking at the same time you're talking, because it's not a known fact. The known fact is I just didn't do it because I decided to lay out on the deck in suntan, and so I didn't do it. But your response might be, well, my mother phoned, and then, well, I had to have my sister, and yeah. We all have been there. We all have done that. I will admit to it too, because sometimes what you're going to jump into by being straight up and honest about it is just so unwelcome and scary that we try to tiptoe our way out of it, but reality hits us and we find out we're in a deeper hole than we started off with. So that's what we want to talk about today, responsibility, being able to respond. So, Linda, I know just from chatting with you a little earlier that this is one of your fave topics, so I want to turn it over to you. What say you, Miss Linda Lehman?
Thank you, Mark. Yes, this is one of my favorite topics, and we could probably spend years talking about it. But if you really think about it, responsibility is true freedom, because most people are walking around locked up in their own mental prison, and they don't even know it. And that's because they're not allowing themselves out to take this responsibility and choose their way. Did you know, Mark, that the greatest ability that we were blessed with as human beings is actually the ability to choose our thoughts? It's so incredibly underused that we can actually choose our thoughts. We can look at a situation and immediately decide, am I going to react to this, or am I going to take a step back and just respond to it? Am I going to let this bug me, or am I going to take the higher road and look for the good in this? Am I going to allow my excuses that were built in when I was 5 years old? Am I going to let this 5-year-old mindset dictate me now that I'm in my 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s? Mark, that's where most people live their lives is based on this behavior, these thought processes, these habits, this conditioning that they had between their birth and when they were about 5 or 6 years old. So could you imagine sitting around? Go ahead. I'd love to hear what you have to say about it.
That's really interesting too, because we talk about this a lot, is that, we don't even develop until, some in 20, 25 years old, where we're fully developed into a person. And that is so incredibly, I think that's something I like to study the most about this, is why when we're developing that we get stuck so often, temper tantrums, not being able to control our anger, all of those things started and kind of stopped when we were 5 or 6 years old. Somewhere between 5 and 6, we kind of learned some manners and things like that. And then all of a sudden, we get older, we're in our job, we're working with people, we revert to that 5-year-old again. Linda, what is up with that?
I'm so glad you asked. That's because, Mark, I like to look at it this way. It's like we have, as adults, we have like a guard posted between our conscious thinking mind and our subconscious mind. And again, as adults. When we're little, that guard's not there right now. Our brains haven't developed enough to have this conscious reasoning. So it's like we're a sponge when we're little, and absolutely everything going on around us, from our parents, our teachers, clergy, environment, our friends, just everything is freely planting itself in our subconscious mind, and it's doing it repetitively. It's not like you're little and you get in trouble for doing something one time and then you never do it again. What you do is you do it over and over and over again, or you hear maybe your parents arguing about money over and over and over again. And so it's this repetition of this information, and it's freely planting because we don't have that ability to stop it and say, no, I choose not to pay attention to this. At that age, we don't have that ability to choose yet. It's not developed. And so all of this is planting in there. And so as an adult, and we're doing things, we're going along, and as you said, all of a sudden, it's like we're throwing a temper tantrum. It's because that conditioning, it's a repetition of all of that conditioning that planted it in there in the first place. And if we're not aware of it being there, then when a situation crops up that makes us feel kind of the same way that we felt as a child, then our bodies, our mind automatically sends up that response that worked when we were a child. And so that's why we're...
Yeah, and you're thinking, too, then at that point, rather than responding, like you said, at that point we're just reacting in the same way that we're conditioned to react. Is that correct?
That is correct. That's exactly correct. Because, how we react to something is a habit. It's based off of that old conditioning. And we don't even realize it sometimes. You'll be in a conversation, or you'll be in a debate with somebody, and it gets totally out of control, or something will happen, like on the highway, road rage. Somebody cuts you off, and you might immediately react. You might give them a week's worth of blessings, or you might have sailor's mouth spewing out of your lips, or you might get angry, and some people take it too far, and they follow a person and ram into them. That's all based on that conditioned behavior when we were children and didn't know how to stop our responses. And it's only when we're an adult and we consciously are aware that we could have these responses, if we can just give ourselves a pause when we feel these feelings come up, or we feel these knee-jerk reactions, if we will start being aware of those and then have a plan set for ourselves as to what we're going to do, either step back, take a pause, activate our beautiful ability of perception, and try to look at this thing from a different angle. And you know what, Mark? I say to myself a lot of times, I know that there's good in here somewhere. Let me find it. Because if we're looking at something and it's upsetting, it's making us angry, it's bad, through the law of a universal law called polarity, everything has an equal opposite. So if we're looking at something and it's bad, or it's making us angry, if we will just take a pause and say, I want to find the good in this, knowing that there is an equal good. so I want to find that good in there somewhere, because that's where the progress is going to be made, and that's when you can respond to the situation instead of reacting to the situation.
And, and Linda, it's really, really true, too, because it's not always in the heat of the moment. Some people spend a good long time actually making up great stories as to why they didn't do something. Like, I swear some people must have been up into the wee hours of the night some days coming up with this alternative reality about why they didn't do something. And it to the extreme, I'm thinking, wow, if you would have taken that same energy and power, really power that it took you to come up with that whacked idea that you came up with to mask your not doing something, you could have been, you could have had so many things done, or you could have done the actual thing that you didn't do in the first place. Like, that's what is always impressed me with people who dodge and weave. They are extremely good at that too. So what do we do? How do we say to someone how do they take that natural and that natural ability, let's say that natural ability to concoct this other reality, when it would be much easier to face the reality and take responsibility? How do they actually shift gears on that?
Well, it's a process, Mark, and because it took years of repetition to get that conditioning in there. But it all starts with being aware that it's there. It takes, as you mentioned, it takes the same amount of energy to move forward as it does to move backwards, or make up all kinds of excuses. And again, if we look at it from the standpoint of making up this elaborate story is my 5-year-old response to something that was happening or something that was going on in my life at that time. And so awareness is key, and playing what I call like the blame game, because that's where a lot of excuses are. And it boils down to just being afraid. Fear disguises itself so beautifully as an excuse, don't you think?
Well, absolutely. Fear, fear, if it ever gets the best of you, I'm afraid to dangle my feet off the side of the bed because there could be monsters under there. I mean, if fear ever gets a slight hold on us, it is certainly one of the most difficult things to conquer.
It is, and why do we believe that? It's so much easier, it seems, as a human being to believe the fear and believe the worst rather than believing the good, and saying, well, what if this works?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you and I both hear, what if it doesn't work? I don't want to do it because what if it doesn't work?
Yep. And and people stop their progress for that exact same thing. You're right. And I guess I don't understand it. I don't even have that, I don't think, in my DNA. And probably I have at times gone way beyond my limits because I don't really have any. I just think that I can possibly do anything. There's some things I definitely choose not to do because there wouldn't be a thrill in it for me, and that's just the end of it. I'm not a skydiver, never will be. But anything that I ever wanted, or anything that I had a little twinkle in my eye about, I had no fear of going and at least giving a good old college try. And, some things I have left by the wayside, or they've manifested in something else. But I certainly don't know. I don't know fear. And so I guess when people tell me they're fearful of doing whatever, like we're entrepreneurs, so I'm fearful of starting my own business because it might fail, or I'm going to put my name out there and then people will think less of me if it doesn't go the way I think it's going to go or want it to go. And again, responsibility and just, responding unpositively to a situation as far as I'm concerned. So what do you say about that, Linda?
Mm-hmm. It's so true, and this sparks up a lot of memories for me, and I'm telling this story in a very loving way. I love both of my parents dearly, and I can remember in those younger years, my dad was very, very ambitious, and most of my growing up years, he was working for someone else. But sometimes, he would venture out and try to do something on his own. He was brilliant at computers way back when computers were these huge, you had to have like an extra house almost to house the big machinery, and you had to keep it cold. But he was brilliant at that, and I know, looking back, that he had this desire to do more and to be more. And so there were some business ventures that he went into, and most of those didn't work. And I think they didn't work because, again, he would get started in it, and then that fear would take over, and it's almost, well, it's a paradigm, and I'm sure that this paradigm was embedded in him, and in the fact that he was raised that you can't make a good living unless you work for somebody else. And that's the same paradigm that was pounded into me as a child. And so, sometimes when I try to venture out and try a new endeavor, or I shouldn't say try, go for a new endeavor, I have, especially in the beginning, struggled with that very paradigm, because all of this stuff from my childhood would come flooding forward. Oh, this isn't going to work for me because it didn't work for my dad. This isn't going to work for me because, as my mom said, these things never work. I can hear those playing, and that's that 5-6 year old recording, that conditioning that I was raised with. And so you're right, Mark. Sometimes it's really tough to get around that. But once I realized what was going on, I asked myself, well, how can this be true all the time? Because this person and this person and this person were successful doing this, so obviously what I'm telling myself is not true. And so this is a desire I have. It's a direction I feel very, very excited about, so let's do it. The worst thing that could happen, it becomes a learning experience. And I think that would be a very good thing. So to me, making mistakes or even perceived failures, it's a learning experience, because we're learning, okay, well, this way didn't work, so I need to look at a different way to do it because I still have this grand goal in mind. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I just too also wonder why it ever came to be. And I'm as you were speaking, I was kind of from childhood as well. And I had both. I had my mom was somebody who worked for a company for most of her working life, and my dad was an entrepreneur. So I had a good balance of both. But I wonder where, and I can't place it in my life, where we think we have to be, I don't know, right or correct the first time out of the gate, or why do we get so defensive when what we do doesn't turn out correctly? I guess it's all wrapped up in our ego and where we have from childhood as well.
You're right, Mark, it is. If you look back, I hate to pick on school and education, but really, when we're little and we're letting our imaginations out to play, it's an awesome thing, and we really develop and we see the wonder all around us. But then we start school, or we start being given a little bit of responsibility, and I think it's in that initial training, because I remember around me, I grew up with two brothers, and I usually let my older brother a lot of times do some things that were kind of outrageous just to see what would happen if he would, quote, get in trouble or not. But the interesting thing is we're taught that when we make a mistake, we, quote, get in trouble. And so then as we grow older, we don't want to get in trouble, and so that's why we think, well, I have to be perfect with this out of the chute, otherwise I'm going to get in trouble. They're going to say that I'm a loser. They're going to say bad things about me. That's interesting, too, because I guess from my perspective, I can always say that I was a very fortunate one.
because I don't think there was any teachers that I had in school, nor my family, that ever once gave me the impression that what I wanted to do, I couldn't do for whatever reason it was. I knew I was cautioned to be careful. I think more so from my mom's side because, again, she came from that mentality of get your paycheck and put away your money. And it's interesting when I look at my brother and sister, they're the same. My sister is exactly like my mom, and my brother is exactly like my dad. And I kind of got the balance of both. Being middle child, I guess it just wore me that way. But I was never, ever had that on my shoulders at any time that I can actually remember. And maybe that is why I don't have any fear of anything. I don't fear repercussion. I don't think I'm going to get punished for anything. And I had done some incredibly, I'll say, pretty much stupid things when I was younger because I just didn't have any limits on me. And luckily, for whatever reason, I was given a governor whereby I don't go to excesses of anything, alcohol, drugs, any of that stuff. It just smoking, nothing of that type interested me at all. But I did race cars, I did, professional skiing and stuff like that at incredible speeds. In those ways, I had no limits, and I always tested my limits. And I always had the support of friends, family, everybody that I can think of, to even my teachers. I don't think I've ever heard in my life, you can't do that. So, I'm blessed and graced for sure.
Oh, you definitely are, because I think that the majority of people out there were probably raised a little bit differently. They were raised with the restrictions, and those restrictions could have been based on fear. And I think that our parents or the people who raised us were really, truly, deeply in their hearts looking out for our best interests, or what they thought were our best interests. But it's like, as a toddler, you're learning to walk, and you're going to fall. And as a parent with a toddler, you see your child walking, and you know that they're going to fall. But then sometimes I think we get a little overzealous, and we because we're trying to protect, we build that fear base in there where, don't do this or you might get hurt. Don't do that or you might get hurt. And I think that too, coming from the protective side, it wasn't necessarily something that was said to be malicious or degrading. It was in an attempt to protect. Sometimes that fear gets planted in there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I can certainly see that. It's funny, I can remember in my being a kid, and we had actually crawled up, took a big ladder, and there were 6 of us getting the ladder up on the side of the green elevator, and we crawled up onto the top, and somehow, some way, the ladder kind of fell off, and we could see my uncle at that time coming in from the fields, and we're sitting there going, well, I'm not jumping. And it's funny, he just drove up and in front of that, looked at all 6 of us towhead kids sitting at the top of this grain elevator, and he said, well, leaves me more for dinner. Thank you all very much. And he just kept tooting along. But what was interesting is we did actually figure out a way how to get through the chute and hanging on a piece of baling wire, swing ourselves across and get everybody down from there. And when we walked in, we thought for sure, we were just going to get tanned alive for doing that, right? And all the adults just sat there looking, and I said, well, look at you all. Look at what you guys did for yourself today. Congratulations. And so that was my life. And I thought, oh, wow, I wonder how much further I can go. Because I think at the time, the youngest of us was maybe 5 or 6 and maybe 12 at the most, right? And that was my life. And that's why I think I'm totally blessed, because everyone was so supportive. But I don't know, they were probably sitting in the back porch with binoculars on and ready to rescue us, but we had no idea of that. But that was my life. And I wish it upon everyone that, think of that, is that you don't have those restrictions on you. Somebody put them on you.
Right. Right.
And like you said, Linda, parent or teachers or whoever it is, they gave you to that. And like Linda just said, it's your choice now as an adult. I don't know, give it back.
Or just let it go. There's a lot of I was actually listening to something from my mentor, Bob Proctor, this morning. And his mentor, Leland Val Vanderwall, passed this on to him. He asked Bob one day, he said, do you really know what the word or forgive means? And Bob tells the story that the way that Val Vanderwall asked the question, he felt like that there's probably more of a lesson in here than what he knew. And he said, no, Val, why don't you tell me what to forgive means? And he said, to forgive means to let it go completely, to abandon it. In other words, you let it go and you never think about it again. You just forget about it completely. Because otherwise, if you want to hang on to that, if you're trying to play a blame game, and this goes back to not taking responsibility. If you're out there and you're trying to blame parents or teachers or guardians or anybody else that raised you on the way you are today, that's a very foolish game, and that you can never ever take responsibility for your own life and for your results as long as you play that blame game. Because ultimately we are responsible. As a child, if something tragic happened, you might not be responsible for that, but you certainly are responsible for how it's affecting you today. Because you do have that choice to put it aside, forgive it, abandon it completely, and then take full responsibility for you, for your life, for your feelings, and for your results.
And I think that's really freeing. I think that is the most freeing thing that getting rid of fear and taking responsibility, where some people might think that is very scary. For me, I think that's got to be the most freeing thing is just, yep, I did it. And I think when that happens too, it relieves pressure from everyone around you, because they're already getting set for, well, what's the excuse going to be this time why this isn't done? Because, again, conditioning that someone is going to make up an excuse. But what a refreshing thing when you just walk in a room and say, yep, I know I was supposed to get this done, but no, it isn't done. I let you down. I take full responsibility, and I'm going to make it up to you.
Yeah. Or I think yourself, right, Mark?
Yeah.
We can have that same self-talk. Okay, well, this week I know I said I was going to take these 3 steps toward owning my own business, and I didn't do it. I sat there and looked at the blank computer screen and didn't do a thing, didn't pick up the phone, make a phone call, or whatever it is you're trying to do. Own up to it, even if it's just to looking at yourself in the mirror and saying, you know what, Linda, you are an amazing person. Yep, I did this week. I didn't take this action, and so I'm going to make certain that this next week I do take this action one step at a time. I'm going to forgive you for whatever was going on in your mind this week, and let's get rolling because we really, really want this goal. But if you beat yourself up, Mark, and hang on to it, you're going to be staring at that same blank screen again next week.
Really, of course, if we don't take the steps to improve our lives and where we are and what we're doing. And you're right, take responsibility for it. But again, I think that if you just take that first step, it's going to be such a relief. And secondly, you might not find out it's as bad as you thought it was, and you'll be laughing at yourself for being so silly that you didn't do something because you were so afraid of it. And we've done that. I mean, there's the big stuff like the fire walks, and we talked about this, and bending rebar with your throat and breaking arrows. Yeah, and that's the extreme of getting rid of any kind of fear that you have. But each and every day, we all have little things that we do that, totally sabotage us from. We're supposed to be eating properly, and we skip our breakfast because we don't take responsibility for either getting up earlier, or we dilly-dally in the shower because the water felt so good, or whatever it is. We will always do that. So if we just simply, for each and every step that we take, each and every thought, like you said, Linda, each and every thought, if we just back up a little bit and say, whoa, why am I going that direction? Like, that's not going to serve me. Then our lives would be much better. So, Linda, take us out on this show. I know we're just about the bottom of our half an hour that we have. And, of course, both of us could talk forever. We know that. And we will revisit these things. Because if you're on the shift for long enough, you'll know that the way we talk and the way we are, it'll intertwine. It'll all intertwine with things we said before and things we'll say later. So, Linda, what's the last word that you have on being responsible and taking responsibility?
Well, sure. Thank you, Mark. And I'd like to leave all of our listeners with a mantra. We have to start somewhere, and sometimes people go, well, I don't know where to start in taking responsibility. So I have an affirmation or a mantra, and I would suggest that the listeners write this down and say this over and over again for, let's say, a minute every single day for the next 30 days. And it will be so empowering and so freeing. Especially, I want you to say it with conviction. And it's this. It's just 3 lines. It's, I am responsible for my life, for my feelings, and for every result I get. Let me say that again. I am responsible for my life, for my feelings, and for every result I get. So if everyone will just say, go ahead.
Yep, yes, very, very powerful, Linda. Very powerful. I can imagine somebody, if you take that to heart, my friends, if you take that to heart and you actually do say that, at first you probably won't believe it, right, Linda? But then after a few days, what happens?
Oh, you can do anything. You can bend that rebar with your throat, and you can walk on those hot coals. When I first started doing this, I would literally pound the beach, saying this to myself over and over and over again. And you know what, Mark? I didn't care that there were other people hearing me say this, and I would stop and I'd look at the water, and I would just get my arms going, because it wasn't in anger. It was just in joy and enthusiasm that I knew in that moment, yes, I am responsible and I am creating the life of my choice.
And I think that that's what we will leave you with today, this evening, is create your life, because you have the ability to do it, and it's your responsibility to do that, because the Creator, the universe, you have that ability. So let's take it out with responsibility. We will see you again next Monday night at 8 p.m. again. And remember, you can catch our episodes right here. Check out our site. Past episodes and more information, books we like, a little bit on all sorts of things that will help you shift into the next gear. So good night, Linda.
Good night, Mark.